This is a highly requested podcast. People have constantly said, get your therapist on. She seems like she knows way more than you. Ella.
Hello. It's not just about you, it's about everything around you as well. Some of those people will see you as a threat and they will want to destroy you because they're not willing to look at themselves.
Why are people in such dire need of therapy right now?
Every situation is so nuanced, it's almost impossible to have just cut everybody off as the answer.
The way for us to be more in touch with our intuition is actually to be less stressed.
Your thoughts create your reality. Your feelings are not facts because they're created by your thoughts. Everything we think, see, feel is a result of our own internal construct.
How do I know if it's my gut speaking or my anxiety?
Choosing to let go of the need for them to validate me. I can validate myself.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Millennial Mind. I can't believe that we are nearly at 70,000 subscribers here on YouTube, and I'm so grateful to every single one of you that has believed in me to make this podcast bigger and better every week. Before we start this episode, I just have to ask you for one tiny favor, and that is to press the follow and subscribe button wherever you're watching this episode, because you have no idea how much it helps me to get incredible guests cast. Let's get into the episode. Ella.
Hello.
What a journey it's been, and we haven't even started yet.
I know.
What a crazy day.
Well, everything that could go wrong has gone wrong. I sit here with a zip busted.
Couldn't find the location. We're very late.
Anyone that's old enough will remember Annika Rice. Challenge Annika, that is me today.
Well, I'm very, very happy to have you here today.
I'm very happy to be here.
I know, and you're still very happy to be here, which is surprising. But the reason why I've got you here, and we just reflected just now, is the last time I interviewed you was almost a year ago.
I know.
And you weren't my therapist then.
No.
But you are my therapist now.
I know, because I've weirdly just pulled you in.
You mean you just constantly have to deal with my calls and my messages and my voice notes to you?
It's a joy.
But you have truly transformed my life. And you have taught me so much. And I also feel like I connect with you on so many different ways.
Yeah.
And this is a highly requested podcast because people have constantly said, get your therapist on. She seems like she knows way more than you. So here we are, everyone. We have her. So for people who perhaps don't know who you are and didn't listen to our last podcast, which you absolutely should, tell us a little bit about yourself. How would you introduce yourself?
Well, I am a psychotherapist, first and foremost, using lots of different modalities, one of them being EMDR, but the others sort of very multi-modal, so very explorative, IFS, which is internal family systems, parts work, also looking at communication styles. So not just listening to the problem, but learning how to communicate, how to lay the foundations of communication as well, because that's often very tricky with, family stuff and relationships, but also looking a lot at trauma. And diagnosed ADHD myself, so work broadly with lots of different neurodiversities and spotting them, not diagnosing them, but spotting them in others.
We'll get on to that. Suggesting, although you've been like, you definitely are, Shivani. I can't diagnose you. I want to talk about why so many people have asked me for your number, which is a peculiar question.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is every time I post about something you've taught me or how you've changed my perception on things, which you have about many things, there are so many people that reach out and say, give me your therapist number. They don't say that for a lot of things that I do.
Wow.
Why are people in such dire need of therapy right now?
There's this thing that I say a lot, and I'll try and keep it really quick. Epigenetics. So epigenetics is how our Janine. Who's Janine?
From EastEnders, that's all I know.
It's how our gene expression evolves over time. So through family dynamics and family lineage, we end up carrying a lot of strength and trauma.
Okay.
So at the moment, the clinical data says that we carry about 7 generations worth of our ancestral lineage in our gene, which means that if you think about World War I, World War II, and all the other sort of famines and things that have gone on in our ancestral lineage, that's 600, 700 years worth, our genetic expression is evolved so that we have a slightly different evolved brain, particularly prefrontal cortex. Life as well has changed dramatically over the last 40 years. Technology has changed, the pace of life has changed, relationships have changed, our ideas about what community looks like have changed. And I think people are predominantly feeling quite lost and like heavy burdened.
Yeah.
There's so much that people carry now. So it's within our genes and it's also externally as well. And it's a very, very different time. Not necessarily harder, but different. Because, you know, if you go back a couple of generations, there was war and there was poverty and there still is now. But it's how much we're carrying, I think, that's changed.
And how do we understand how much we're carrying?
Well, I always say you can feel it before you can understand it. Now, when we talk about feeling, we've got to look at the sort of vagus nerve and nervous system. You will feel that you're carrying stuff. So there's two places, chest and heart area, throat, third place, solar plexus. So that's above your belly button and below your rib cage. If you feel heavy or even like there's a void there, and if you feel tight and like there's a compression in your chest, you know intuitively that you're carrying too much. You can feel it. Then you have to work out what that stuff is, which is the hard bit if you've never spoken about anything before.
So this is interesting. So you're saying that generationally we all carry trauma.
Yes.
And we all carry something within us.
Well, it's coded in. Think of the DNA structure that kind of doesn't change, but the codes that are sent through the genes. So in 2013, there was a big clinical study done with Holocaust survivors looking at their grandchildren. And it was shown that their grandchildren had higher incidences of stress disorders, depressive disorders and anxiety disorders than the study group that had no clinical trauma noted. These studies have also been done with famine survivors. And so you look at the coded differences in the epigenetics to see what your grandchildren are more likely to carry as a result of your own traumas. So like I said, clinical data shows about 7 generations worth. So you've got to think about all those traumas and strengths, but that goes for physiological as well as psychological and emotional. So, when we look at things like ADHD and neurodiversity, the chances are that we're evolving into a society that has more of that than ever before because of epigenetics.
But surely our parents' generation had that too then.
They did, but I think we know so much more about it. But I think there's lots of studies going into trauma and ADHD and trauma and autism. So it sort of suggests that the traumas that our ancestors have experienced would have changed the structure of the brain in terms of prefrontal cortex and executive function. So I think we're seeing more now. Maybe we're diagnosing more, maybe we're understanding more, but I think we are seeing more. That's what I see.
So it's really interesting that you mentioned that, because I think a lot of people at the moment, if they're struggling with something, would never actually look to study their ancestors. I wouldn't be like, what did my great-grandfather go through? And this is why I'm feeling a certain way.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is you're saying that it has a direct correlation to our mood, how we feel, and the way that we behave.
So much study. The problem is with science is that it moves so quick. And there's so many studies. And where there's one study that says one thing, there's 10 studies that say another.
Right.
So we kind of have to use that knowledge of our own families. What do we know about our grandparents? I mean, some of us don't have the benefit of being able to ask questions because perhaps we're not talking to our parents or whatever, but we can try and find out about our history and we can try and find out how that correlates to now. And I think, as a therapist, I'll see in clinic more often than not, people will talk about their parents and they'll know a little bit about their grandparents, but that's where the curiosity ends. And I actually think if we look at the sort of spiritual side of things as well, the learnt behaviour side of things, the way that we watch and because children don't listen, they watch. The way we watch the people around us, we're absorbing so much all the time. We're like little computers. We're computing everything all the time, not necessarily understanding it and not actually having the ability to understand it until we're at least 21. So we're just these filters that are absorbing everything. And again, that's why I think it feels like such a heavy burden, because there's so many layers to this. It's not just about you, it's about everything around you as well. And I think we don't realise how open we are energy-wise. We don't understand that because we're not taught that. This is a much more newer understanding, and you only have to look at things like how everything in this planet vibrates, in the universe. Everything's a vibration. So if you walk into a room and, people have been arguing, but you've walked in, say, 10 minutes after the argument's finished, you will feel that energy in that room. That vibration is still palpable. Same if you walk into a room where people have been laughing and having a great time. You'll walk in and you'll feel that energy. The vibration is still happening. So there's some universal laws. People can look into this, the Hermetic principles, and they are a set of philosophical principles. And they sort of, most religions echo them, most science echo them, and most spirituality do. But it's sort of the laws of vibration, of correspondence, of polarity. And we have to look deeper into the sort of energetic laws, yin, yang, all those really beautiful Eastern principles that, you know, again, it's about being curious, I think, and not just looking at this happened to me and this is why I am the way I am. It's bigger than that. And that's where that neurodiversity conversation comes into it quite a lot of the time, because there's so many different layers, and it's hard to answer a direct question sometimes because you'd have to look at so many different parts, and that leads into internal family systems, which allows us to look at the parts of ourselves that are formed as a result of genetic expression, lived experiences, spirituality, religion. All these different parts exist. It's about exploring them, being curious and being compassionate.
One of the best things you ever told me was about how we are kind of all like robots.
Yeah.
And because everything that we do has been learned.
Yeah.
Which means that everything that has been learned could be unlearned.
Definitely.
So if I have a negative way of thinking, I can change that.
You definitely can.
How?
First of all, you have to want to. And that's the hardest bit, because we love the familiar. The survival brain is always, first and foremost, keeping us going. Okay. That's the most important part, because it's part of the subconscious, 95% of our thinking. Right. The subconscious wants to survive. So the first part is breaking through the barriers of wanting to, which really means facing the unfamiliar and being comfortable with the uncomfortable. The second part is understanding that everything we think, see, feel is a result of our own internal construct. So our construct will be based on what we've learned, how the brain wires around that neurologically, what we believe to be true, what is good, what is bad. That comes from religion, spirituality, all of those sorts of things. So once we understand that it's kind of like the Matrix, red pill, blue pill. And I don't mean to be facetious when I say that, but sometimes it's kind of like, if I feel bad, if I feel like there is no hope in my life, what can I do about this? Because I don't know if you remember me saying on the last podcast with my own experience, I got to rock bottom.
Yes.
It was awful. And I was really giving up hope. But I was looking at other people around me that were making lots of money or having beautiful relationships or buying houses. And I was starting to think, there's something different going on here. And okay, yes, it's a different experience, but they're doing things differently.
Yes.
They speak a different language to me, like in terms of emotional language or in terms of career. So I started to observe and be curious. And it always has to be about curiosity and observation, getting to the wise mind. This is where hypnotherapy and EMDR and those sorts of therapies are great. As a therapist, you can't just expect someone to come in, talk, walk out and be a different person. You have to use the brain. You have to use the brain-based principles and tools, but you also have to use the philosophies, and you have to look at the parts, because a part of you will resist change, because again, it's familiar to stay the same even if it's painful. That part is always in play.
Without saying what it is, have you seen me resistant to change?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah.
Can you share without sharing the detail, if that makes sense?
Yes, I think I can. Okay. I think there's a fear of losing control.
We've talked about that.
Yeah, I think control.
So vulnerable. I can't believe I just asked you that question.
I know.
Welcome to the therapy session.
I think there's a fear of losing control.
Okay.
Because control for you equals safety now.
Yeah.
Although it's maladaptive. Because actually what it does is it confines you to a space, to a container. The container that you're used to staying in at the moment has certain confines and constructs. Outside of that, which is accepting, and I think as a public figure you'll relate to this, accepting that not everybody is going to like you or love you or agree with you, and actually they might try and destroy you because you represent a threat to them. So some of your listeners and watchers, and there may be other people in your life that do this around you, some of those people will see you as a threat, and they will want to destroy you because they're not willing to look at themselves. So what we have to do is we have to look at that, observe that from a wise mind perspective, and challenge ourselves within it. What can we learn from other people's resistance to us? We have to learn to let go sometimes and to accept that we cannot change what other people think. But for us to feel free, we might need to come out of the container. And that feels very, very vulnerable. You just said about being vulnerable. Yes. Vulnerability is the scariest thing, but it's also the most magnetic thing because it's where you're the authentic self.
Yes.
And it's getting to that core self and really being prepared to put it on display and say, right, what do I need to see? Because we've built a lot of parts around the core self: control, perfectionism, procrastination, all those kind of things, anger even.
Yeah.
Those parts feel like they're keeping us safe. But actually, those protector parts might also think that we don't, the core self, because we've learnt this somewhere, doesn't have the ability to survive without the managers, without the protectors.
How interesting.
Yeah.
So you talk a lot about the protector self. I just want to strip it back for people who perhaps don't know about that. Talk to me about that.
So when
What's
we're
the protector self?
The protector self are the bits that, let's say you were bullied at school.
Okay.
And for 2 years you were pushed around, called names, and nobody was really there to help. And one day you get angry and you might lash out at the bully. And then the bullying stops. So your subconscious goes, it helped me to be angry. From that point on, every now and then, you raise your voice. You might even physically lash out. And each time you do that, someone hears you. They stop. They pay attention. It might not always be a great response, but something has stopped and you feel safer. That forms a maladaptive protector part. And it's maladaptive because actually, as you become an adult and as you go into your relationships and your workspaces, anger is not a great way to communicate. But your subconscious kind of goes, well, kept you safe, so we're going to keep doing it. Think about that with perfectionism. You might work twice as hard and twice as long as anybody else, but you keep getting validated. So you learn to accept that perfection is the only way that you can be validated. The core self knows, that's the higher self, that you don't have to do that, but we lose that. We lose that intuition because our nervous system is now stressed. When we're in stress and survival mode, we're no longer able to stay in gut instinct and intuition because our vagus nerve is perhaps in something called dorsal vagal state, which is disconnect and disassociate. So the core self is disassociated and the manager parts have come in to take over.
Wow. So the way for us to be more in touch with our intuition is actually to be less stressed.
Yes. And to do less of the protector part. That's where vulnerability and authenticity come in. So if we feel that we're going into anger or we feel we're going into perfectionism or procrastination, we have to observe. We have to be, this is where therapy helps. And I would help people to find their parts and to be compassionate and curious because they are trying to help. We don't want to be, in a critic mode and, I hate this part of me and this part of me so stupid and why do I do this? We want to kind of find out what they've done and why they're there. And then we unblend. And this is again, to reference internal family systems therapy. Richard Schwartz is the founder. So anyone that wants to Google Richard Schwartz, internal family systems, or YouTube, it's a really fascinating form of psychotherapy. It's phenomenal. And it links into the EMDR and polyvagal theory, another one for people to Google and to YouTube. This is the dorsal vagal state. Talks about the vagus nerve in two parts and then the sympathetic nervous system, which is fight, flight. And you find that people, by the way, that are neurodiverse struggle more with that kind of dorsal vagal state, disconnect and disassociate. So the therapist helps you to identify those parts and helps you to have compassion and curiosity for those parts and go back to core self. Those practices such as breath work, cold therapy, walking, exercise, journaling, all those types of things help you get to core state because you're being present and you're being mindful. And in those spaces you can feel the energy. You can feel what's right instinctively. So lots of the things that people will have heard before, but learning to sew them all together. And if needed, the trauma-focused work. Because if you're caught in your limbic system, which is the emotional center of the brain, if you're caught in a trauma, a feeling or state, dorsal vagal is one of them for disconnect, sympathetic nervous system, fight, flight. If you're caught in that, you've got to come out of it before you can do the deeper work. So I would assess where someone is and what they need. Not everybody wants to do trauma reprocessing, but if they do, and if I feel they have to do that to get to the next stage, I'll push for that.
Fascinating. After our last podcast, one of the key things that people asked is, how do I listen to my intuition? How do I know if it's my gut speaking or my anxiety?
Yeah.
How would somebody know that?
So go back to those 3 parts of the body that I always refer to. Solar plexus above the belly button, below the rib cage. That area is to do with self-esteem, self-identity, self-worth and will. If you are feeling blocked or avoid some sort of heavy, dark feeling there that suggests that there's something going on around you that's triggering your self-esteem, self-worth issues. So intuitively, who is it that's triggering that feeling? Why are they triggering that feeling? What is it about this person that makes me feel really heavy in my gut? That's your intuition. That's your body keeping the score. If it's around the heart and the chest and around the throat, it means that we feel suppressed. What's going on around me? What's happening in my life at work or at home that's making me feel that I can't quite connect to love and I can't quite speak my voice and speak my truth? What is going on? Those things intuitively are felt in the body. It's up here where we ignore it. Now, because we don't always want to pay attention to the bigger issues, what can happen is we start to make things up here, which could be something like, oh, I don't think it's them, I think it's me, I think I just need to try harder. What do I have to do to be better? What can I do to prove myself? How can I get that validation? How can I get people to see that I am good enough? We look at things like attachment styles, anxious attachment, avoidant attachment, but you feel it in your body. You've probably had this with friendships 100%. Or work. You just know.
Yeah.
You just know in your body, but we ignore it because we're using our front brain to be analytical when we should be listening to the core, listening to the body. It's all there.
And the interesting part that you're saying about the body, but how would I know if it's anxiety from me having a terrible experience in the past and therefore just my brain saying, oh, this person's a threat to you, or if intuitively that person is a threat to me?
When something is anxiety, it's a bit longer, in my honest opinion. So as a therapist, I see that the people that are in the habit of overthinking,
right,
the overthinking is a protector part. Now, that overthinking has helped you to work people out, usually when you're a child. So if your caregivers or the people around you that are supposed to look after you haven't validated, have made you feel insecure, have made you feel scared, have made you feel like you're not enough, the child doesn't have the ability to analyse that information properly. So they self-abandon and they start to overthink everything. I'll try and be a good girl, or I'll try and be a good boy if I can just keep my room tidy, if I can just get home on time. Those kind of things. They can't make sense of what's actually going on. So they start to overthink themselves. So when it's a intuitive feeling, it tends to be very sudden. It tends to be very clear. Whether you choose to listen to it or not is another thing. If you're feeling that constant heaviness and you notice that you're thinking a lot, the two are linked. But it's still something that's been triggered from something else. So nobody can trigger anything that doesn't already exist.
100%.
But usually when you meet someone, you know whether they're good for you or not. It's an instant feeling. How long you let that go on for will determine whether it becomes an anxious, overthinking type of problem or whether it's an intuition.
I'm going to challenge you. When I said that lovely comment that you just said, thank you for that, by the way, around how no one can trigger you unless you yourself feel triggered by it, or unless you yourself feel a reaction to it. Let me start again. No one else can trigger you over something that you're not already insecure about. Right? Yeah. Someone said, I'm insecure about my weight because my whole life, someone's constantly said you're fat.
Yeah.
Now someone else has called me fat, but I don't really believe I am. It's just everyone says I am. So why am I triggered? Is it my fault then?
It's not your fault, but it suggests that at some point in your life that there's been an unresolved experience. So it's not your fault. So I actually used to be very, very overweight. So now if someone was to say I was fat, there's a part of me that would probably, that's unresolved, that would probably go, oh, maybe I am a bit, maybe I do need to lose a bit of weight. And my weight goes up and down like a yo-yo. So it can be that someone says something and I'm like, I've got to lose some weight.
Right.
So it's unresolved. It's not necessarily that it's my fault, but I haven't maybe paid attention to it at the time because perhaps it was of an age where I wasn't able to make sense of why I was overweight.
But this is really difficult, I guess, because... And I get why someone challenged me in the comments when I said that. I said that if someone said, I have blue hair, I'm not going to feel triggered by it.
Yeah.
Right? But let's say someone said, Shivani, you're a terrible podcast host. Don't say that. Let's just say that they said that. Maybe I would feel, oh gosh, maybe I am.
But where would that stem to for you?
Because I want to be really good at it. So if someone else is saying
perfectionism.
Right.
So for you to be criticised for something that's really important to you, perhaps as a bit of a perfectionist, if you're criticised, then that's hitting something deeper down.
But isn't that just rude of that person to say it?
It is, but you can't control that. What you can do is go, if that's hit me and I feel this, where did it start? Why do I feel so aggravated by someone else's opinion of me that I don't even know? And it's a deeper wound. It's something unresolved where you feel like you've got to be perfect to be enough.
So everything that we are triggered by is because of some kind of wound we've experienced in our life.
Yeah.
But that could apply to anything.
Yeah. Like, again, if someone said I was a rubbish cook, I don't care. Like, it's of no relevance to me whatsoever. But if I cared about cooking and I really wanted to be good at it and someone said that, then I would probably link that to a time when I've been told, and I have been told this my whole entire life, you could try harder, you could do better, And what I found actually was that I've learned to accept, because I've done all the work on myself too, that I'm very, very good at 2 or 3 things. The rest of it I accept, I'm not very good at. That's okay for you to think that. It doesn't bother me anymore because I've resolved that and I've put all of my energy into 2 or 3 things that I'm very, very good at. And I've got no qualms anymore of whether you agree with me or not, because the proof is in the pudding. But I've had to do all that work and remove people from my life that were suffocating me, where I couldn't get the space to do the work. This is where it's such a big process, because if there's people around you that are constantly criticising you, for me it was family. They weren't constantly criticising me, but their energy, because of the trauma around my family, was very suffocating. I had to create the space. And from that moment, having that space, having those boundaries, I was able to focus on my core self. Whilst I was around toxic people, I was in protect apart mode all the time. I wasn't being authentic. I wasn't being vulnerable. I was in survivor mode. Removing certain people from my life has allowed me to have the clarity and space to do the work. So perhaps the answer to this question is, if someone that you don't know is triggering you, maybe there's someone closer to home that is triggering you constantly, and actually that's bringing that deeper triggered wound to the surface.
Cutting people out, I think, is a very Gen Z and millennial way of life, actually.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I agree with it.
No, you can't always.
So this is, you've just said a really interesting point, and I'm not saying you're wrong. I actually think a lot of people would agree with you.
Yeah.
If someone is disrespecting you, if someone is being horrible to you, if someone is putting you down, if someone is bullying you, whatever the word is, you shouldn't have them in your life. Yeah. Right? However, Ideally.
This is the key bit.
But it has gone a bit too far.
I think some people are just a bit intolerant now.
I was just going to say that. Because someone could just say, I don't like your hair colour. I don't know anyone that would say that. I like your hair colour, by the way. I don't know why I gave that.
Oh my God, I'm going to the hairdressers on Thursday. I will have a word with them.
But let's just say that someone said, okay, you talk a lot about EMDR, okay? Now, if someone said, look, I don't really agree with EMDR.
Yeah.
Let's just say.
Yeah.
If someone said to me, I don't really agree with a podcast, and I think they're really stupid. I think if I was not open to criticism or learning, I would shut down and be like, you're so negative, and I'd cut them out.
Yes.
However, if I was open to learning, I'd be like, that's interesting. Tell me more.
Yeah.
Why do you hate podcasts?
Yeah.
And I would try and understand it. Now, I just do think our generation, and I speak behalf on all of us, we are becoming a little bit less tolerant.
Yes. So I think there's extremes. I mean, I don't particularly feel that you should just cut off anyone and everyone. I think there has to be a process. There has to be some negotiation at least.
Right.
I mean, you know, ghosting and stonewalling people is not, I mean, that's a toxic behaviour. So we can't...
Talk to me about that. What's stonewalling people?
So stonewall is when you just shut off and ignore people. A bit like ghosting. It's a similar sort of thing. Stonewalling is a bit more complex because it can happen in relationships where someone wouldn't talk to you for like 3 days, you know, have had an argument and they will give you the silent treatment. So that's not good. Yeah, torture. Ghosting is when you're in a friendship or a relationship with someone and they literally just stop replying to your messages with no explanation. And so we've got extremes of cutting people off, and that's not okay. That is toxic. I think if you have tried and you've negotiated and you've shown empathy and, you know, you've had some conversations and you just feel like you've tried everything, there comes a point where the boundaries need to be clear. Now, maybe that doesn't mean cutting them off in everybody's situation. Maybe that just means let's take some space and revisit this in 6 months.
Yeah.
But sometimes there is the end of the road. And like with my family, my mum and dad in particular, for those who haven't watched the other podcast, it was a very toxic family system. I had to step away because it was literally a case of I will never grow in this situation. Like I have to be able to grow. I have to be able to put that core self first and repair and heal properly and allow myself to continue that healing. And I couldn't do it in that situation. But with friends, I'm always open because I think there is always a way. It's just whether someone is hurting you repeatedly. Because if they are, I think we do need to have the conversation about, is it time to protect yourself, your core self, not using protector self, but really have a broader perspective of this situation and look at the way their energy is making you feel. If you feel like you're walking on eggshells, if you feel like you can't express yourself, if you feel that every time you have a conversation with that person, you feel absolutely, you know, broken in bits, crying, you've got to question whether there is the end of the road in certain relationships.
This is such an interesting perspective, I think, because if someone is being abusive towards you, they'll always frame it onto you as well. They'll always gaslight you.
Yeah.
Now, gaslighting is a term that I never really knew about, but it's one that I think is so apt for toxic relationships because I would say I'm quite a strong person.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, you are.
I have been gaslit so many times
Yeah.
where I've been thinking and I've said to you, is this real? Is this happening? Am I going mad?
Yeah, which is a classic sign of being gaslit.
Right. So how does somebody heal from a toxic relationship? Can you heal from a toxic relationship?
You can. And in those circumstances where it's abusive, there does need to be a cutoff point.
Just FYI, no one was abusing me. It sounds like
it will ask, lots of questions will be asked. No, I think there comes a point where if you are being made to question your own sanity, then ultimately there has to be a cutoff point. You can heal when there's time and space, but you can't if they're constantly around you. And that's, if this is a complex system, so if the person that's gaslighting you is a family member or you know, if it was a in-law or if it was a best friend or a friend of a friend, and you're constantly having to be in these circles, it's a way of creating time and space so that you can do the growth and the healing. Every situation is so nuanced and so complex and so individual, it's almost impossible to have just cut everybody off as the answer. That's why it is a good question to say about this whole just get rid of them.
Yeah.
If you're seeing that on social media and you're like, yeah, but we're connected through so many different ways, business or family, you can't always just do that.
And also you're isolating yourself from everyone without giving people the opportunity to learn and understand.
Yeah.
Right?
So in terms of healing, when we've got time and space, there's lots of ways you can do that. First of all, I think we've got to talk about the somatic side of healing as well, because when the limbic system is on alert, so it's been hijacked, you've got your amygdala, which is your danger tracker, being hijacked because you've been gaslit, because you've been emotionally abused, physically abused, sexually abused. Your brain is now going to be in hypervigilant mode a lot. That affects the nervous system and the vagus nerve. So we've got to look at the brain-body link and do the somatic healing work, which is breath work, exercise, cold water therapy, yoga, stretching, all those sort of tension release exercises. And then it is about, in my opinion, obviously I'll say this as a therapist, finding a coach or a therapist, even if it's someone online, like an online course, if you can't afford that one-to-one or group work, finding a process with a therapist or a coach where they walk you through it step by step. It's not always just about talking and listening. There has to be a process when it comes to healing from trauma, because it is in the brain and it is in the body, and it's about understanding all of the different parts, physiologically, psychologically, emotionally, and mentally.
I have an interesting question for you. Let's say you and I get into an argument.
Yeah.
Right? And actually, let's not say you and I. Let's just say me and someone called Ben get into an argument.
Yeah.
Both Ben and I have been horrible to each other. Right? We both have a different perspective. If Ben comes to speak to you and you have no idea we have a relationship, by the way.
Yes.
And I come and speak to you.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you just be validating both of our feelings?
To a degree, yes. Because this is a very good question, Shivani. I like it. To a degree, yes, because I think in all circumstances, even arguments I've had, there are times when I feel very right, but I might not have delivered it in the right way.
Right.
So the other person might have a valid point. So you would validate that point, but I would also ask them to be curious. What does that situation teach you about yourself? What parts of yourself came up that you think the other person might have seen and perhaps been triggered by themselves? Or what could you be responsible for?
Yes.
Because yes, they've said something horrible and they've said it in a tone that was really difficult for you to take. But I believe that every situation is a lesson for us to be accountable, because no one is ever fully right. You can have two people that have completely different opposing views and they can both be right. Now, I say that because, do you remember what I said about the Matrix? Everything that we think is there's a term, if you look at Hermetic principles, called mentalism. And it basically says that the universe exists inside your head. Your thoughts create your reality. Your feelings are not facts because they're created by your thoughts. So you would want to validate both people, but then you would want to do the exploration, the curiosity, the self-compassion and introspection, but also the compassion for the other person, which is multifaceted and nuanced, but it's, I think, essential for the whole human experience. We can't just walk around thinking we're right about everything. In an abusive situation, I'd be looking for core things. You know, is this person questioning their sanity? Are they feeling suppressed? Do they feel like they can tell me that what's going on? Do they feel scared? Because if someone is genuinely in a fearful mindset, I might start asking questions and being curious about whether that relationship is a healthy relationship. But even with someone, and I've said this on another podcast and got slated for it, but even when someone is abusive, I could still, even if they're a full-blown narcissist, they've physically, sexually, emotionally abused someone, I would still want to show some level of compassion to try and work out where their predator came from. Why did that predatory side of them come to the surface? What is it that's going on beneath the surface? I feel my job as a therapist is to be able to help people find their core self, because that's where healing begins. So if I'm not showing compassion to the abusers, then we're not actually resolving the deeper problem. If you look at paedophiles, child molesters, wife beaters, it starts somewhere. To fully heal communities, you have to get to the root of where the predator begins.
But if you're healing yourself and you're feeling compassionate for someone else, how are you not being a pushover?
Boundaries. If you've got good boundaries, you can be compassionate and show love and have love and hold love for someone else, but still know that they are treating you with disrespect. So it's about boundaries, standing back with compassion and love, with respect. I think that's always a good way to start a conversation. With respect and with love, I need to take this space for myself, because this is bringing up feelings in me which are not conducive to a healthy relationship right now. I feel we need that time and space. So but you could still hold love for someone. I hold love for my dad, for my mum, but I know that I can't have them in my life.
This is really interesting. So I guess if people haven't watched the first podcast,
Yes.
you were abused by your dad.
Yes, sexually and physically abused by my dad, and my mum stayed with my dad. They're still together now, even though he went to prison and admitted what he'd done and was violent again after he came out of prison. Their relationship continued, and I ended up having to retract because it was I wasn't able to function in a healthy way.
Of course.
And I needed to step back out of it. It was only 8 or 9 years ago now that I did that, because I did maintain the relationship for many, many years afterwards. So I do still love them. They're my parents.
I guess people listening to that would maybe ask, how could you love your parents after they've hurt you so much? Because I'm sure there's people out there whose parents have really hurt them,
Yeah.
shown them zero respect, abused them in whatever way,
Yeah.
and they believe that they don't love them.
Yeah.
But you're saying deep down,
Yeah.
you do love yours.
I think it's core self-work, understanding that the core of me is compassionate and curious and loving. That's the core of all of us, actually. We're all born with that. What happens to us changes that.
Yeah.
That's my matrix, that I've decided to step out of the matrix and into core self, and to understand the deeper wounds that they both carry. I've had to kind of do some exploration without them, obviously.
Of course.
One of the processes that I do is emotional reprocessing. So it goes into understanding their inner child, what they experienced as children, what may have made them step into the modes they stepped in, their protector modes. So what I love about internal family systems, for me personally as a therapist, but me personally as a human, is that looking at my parts and then doing a deeper dive into their parts, and sort of, yes, having to do a little bit of guesswork.
Right.
It made me just understand that they didn't, I don't believe, they didn't want to hurt me. I don't think anyone chooses to be an abuser. I think they become an abuser.
I agree.
The abuse become the abuser sometimes. The hurt people hurt people. So it's understanding that and choosing to let go of the need for them to validate me.
Yes.
Because at core self, I can validate myself.
It's so powerful. I think in order to forgive, you really have to be at peace with acceptance. And that's what you've really taught me as well.
Yeah.
It's like accepting someone for who they are.
Yeah.
And accepting yourself for who you are.
Yes.
And I always have to remind myself, who do I want to be?
Yeah. Yes.
Right? You are that person.
Yeah.
But you cannot change the core of who I am.
Correct.
And so often if I get into a situation where I'm struggling with someone else, one of the best things you've ever taught me was never let them define who you are and your characteristics.
Yeah.
Because they can change you.
Yeah.
If they really, really try.
If they
and
really,
you
really
let
try.
them.
And also looking at them, if you always try and visualize the person that's hurting you as the child, what is it? What is their pain that's making them become that predator? Now, they might be a predator just for 10 minutes.
Right.
Or it might be consistent. But what's making them behave that way towards me? Why me? Everything's a mirror, right? Everything's a mirror. So perhaps they're seeing something in you that triggers something in them. It goes back to that trigger. But this is deeply, deeply, deeply unconscious. Most people aren't walking around. I mean, obviously my job means that I think about this far deeper than most people do. But the idea is that you're understanding, a bit like the onion, the layers, the parts. It's all the same thing. And there's some great philosophies out there. That's why I like the Hermetic principles. But religion, faith, all these things for different people work. You know, you don't have to be a scientist. You don't have to be religious. You don't have to be spiritual. But there are universal laws and cycles. And we all know that energy is very, very strong. We can feel it. You know, even today, getting here, rushing around, we've got a good relationship. So
true.
We can work together. It doesn't matter if my clothes are falling off me.
But you are right, because a lot of people wouldn't be able to just snap into it in 1 second and be like, let's go.
Yeah.
They wouldn't be able to.
That's the good energy that we naturally have between us. But I think that's also because we both have ADHD, whether you're diagnosed or not.
Talk to me about that.
Well,
why do you think I'm diagnosed with ADHD?
Well, I think you could be diagnosed with ADHD. I think you have this real ability, and it's similar to what I've got. The bit where people used to say to me all the time, how are you so strong, or whatever word they used, how did you get over what happened to you? I actually think it's my ADHD. I actually think it gives you such a resilience executive function may fail, timekeeping may fail, organisation, planning, all those executive functions, focus, attention. But I have hyperfocus. I'm very obsessed with the things that I really love. I'm able to rise above emotion a lot of the time, although I can get emotionally dysregulated. If it's something that I care about and something I'm focused on, I can stay hyper-focused. And so it gives me this little bit of a resilience over things that other people don't seem to have. I believe that ADHD gives you resilience, gives you the hyperfocus, the obsession that you need to be really, really successful. You only have to Google celebrities or entrepreneurs with ADHD to work out that it is something very, very special and unique. Yes, my wardrobe may look a complete mess, but my life is generally very good. Yes, I may lose my mind sometimes through emotional dysregulation, but I can snap back quite quickly.
Right.
So with ADHD, everything's in a rush.
Yeah,
It's rush. Yeah. We have to get there quickly. We have to do it now. You have a lack of dopamine, so it's hard to retain dopamine. So we're often looking for the next hit. But that makes us very hyper-focused on what it is that we're good at. And I think sometimes where it comes to emotional dysregulation, we can sound a bit blunt because we kind of know what someone's going to say and we want them to shut up and get to the point. So we can be a bit blunt. Which can be mistaken as rudeness, but it's just like, let's get to the point.
Yeah, how interesting. But I'm not like that in the podcast, I don't think.
No, not at all. But I think both of us.
But in daily life, I would agree.
Yeah, but we could. But you've often said to me at the end of a session, "Oh, well, I hope you didn't think I was being blunt."
I do say that to you all the time.
I get it. Like you and I operate exactly the same way.
But that's because I only have 1 hour with you, and it's never enough time.
I know.
So I'm always like, get to the point. So I'm like, Ella, you know what I'm going to say? Just like, give me the answers. I don't want to know the context. Just give me the answer now.
And then she always apologises. I'm like, look, you are basically me. We are the same person. I get it. You don't need to apologise to me.
I love the fact that you said that ADHD is a superpower.
Yeah.
A lot of people at the moment think that it's just a little phase.
Yeah.
Phase,
yeah.
And they think that it's just, what's the word? The fact that everyone's got it. It's a cool thing to have ADHD now.
Well, everyone hasn't got it. I mean, the statistics alone show that, which I can't recall off the top of my head. I will provide you with them so you can put that on the bottom. But the statistics alone show that not everyone has it. What I do believe is that we're all pre-coded, like I was saying with the epigenetics, to be on a spectrum of some kind. I think the reason that we're all so curious about ADHD and autism now is because, as I said, we've evolved. The human race has evolved, especially prefrontal cortex. So we probably are seeing higher levels of it now. And I think it's important to, if you feel like you've got something like ADHD or autism, it's important to have that clarity because actually it can give you the ability to explain, if I'm blunt with somebody or if I'm rushing somebody, it gives me the ability to explain that and to sort of take accountability for that. And it gives that other person the idea, do you know what, this is kind of like that neurological thing. Fine, it's not personal. So it gives clarity. But it's not just a phase. I think social media makes it look like everyone's got ADHD. But, you only have to say ADHD and your phone picks up on it because the microphone's on. So this is why we're seeing it everywhere.
Got it.
But yeah, I mean, it could be seen as a bit of a silly fad. And to be honest, I've got to say this. You've got to be careful of the information you absorb about ADHD or autism on social media because you might have bipolar. You might have borderline personality disorder. If you aren't speaking to a professional that knows this inside out, you could diagnose yourself with ADHD and you could actually have quite a serious mental disorder.
Wow.
So I think the problem is with all of the sort of faddy stuff on ADHD and autism on social media is that people diagnose themselves and they might have an underlying condition that they're missing.
The interesting part about saying you have ADHD, I guess, and this comes with anything that someone comes to with as a therapist.
Yeah.
Isn't it an excuse to say, look, Ella, I grew up in a dysfunctional family. My granddad was struggled in war. I've had 7, talking about what we started talking about at the beginning.
Generational stuff, yeah.
Yeah, what we talked about in the beginning about generational stuff.
Yeah.
Aren't all these things just a reason for someone to just say, well, I am the way I am and I don't want to change?
It's a reason, not an excuse. So I always say, look, let's find who you are.
What's the difference between a reason and an excuse?
And a reason goes, these are the things that have happened to me, to my ancestors. This is why I think I am the way I am, and I can accept that. But I need to be accountable for my behaviour, and I need to reframe, and I need to be responsible. So now we know why I am the way I am, and we've laid those foundations out. I can tell you from your personality, these types of tools are probably going to be more beneficial. If you've got ADHD, there's no point in me sending you War and Peace to read because you're not going to be able to focus.
Right.
So, the tools that you use with people have got to be appropriate to what they bring to the table. So when I say it's a reason, yes, those reasons are there. Here's the tools we can use. Let's not make it an excuse. Just because I was abused, it doesn't give me the right to go around abusing other people. So it's a reason that I might be dysfunctional, but it's not an excuse to hurt anybody else.
Right, I love that. I spoke to someone today and he was a coach and he told me a really lovely analogy about a mirror and a torch. Have you heard about it?
I probably have, but remind me.
I think it reminds me of you because he was saying that a coach or a therapist or someone in your life, they either hold a torch up to things so you can see things in a different way, or there's a mirror and it allows you to reflect. And I think what you've allowed me to do is give me that space to reflect, but you've also shown me so much with your light, with your torch. And I think that happens with so many people. And this is why I think it's so important to go to a therapist or a coach or speak to somebody.
Yeah.
Because a good friend, a good therapist, and the question I asked you around, doesn't every therapist just validate their feelings?
Yeah.
That wasn't my question that you said was so good. Someone asked me that. And I said, yeah, they probably do. But the right therapist will ask you why you're feeling that way.
Yeah.
Why you've been in that situation, exactly what you said.
Yeah.
And they'll question you.
Yeah.
The right person, and I always say this about friendships,
Yeah.
you never ever want a friend that's going to always say, you're right, you're amazing, and they
True.
never challenge you. And if you challenge your friends and they don't like it, the number one thing you should say to them is, I'm only doing this to help you.
Yeah.
I'm only trying to help you see a different perspective.
Yeah.
Because if we don't have friends who challenge us, if we don't have people who give us another perspective, how will we grow?
It's so true. And where you feel hurt, if someone's not delivered it in a very positive way, there's been people that have delivered things to me that have been through anger or, whatever. And I've always tried to stand back and go, okay, I don't like the way they delivered it, but I have to look at myself. I have to look at myself because I want to grow. I don't want to stay the same. Why would I want to stay the same? If you look at anything in life, a flower growing, a tree growing, it has to move. There's momentum.
Yes.
There's blossom and apples and all these wonderful things. And then they drop off sometimes. And we go through the seasons.
So true.
And we have to do that. We do reflect the universe in that way. We do reflect nature. And if we look at nature, it has all the answers. Nothing is linear. Nothing stays the same. Everything is in cycles. So when someone is shouting at you, take it as an opportunity to reflect. Just like nature, when there's a thunderstorm, what's it actually doing? It's clearing. It's clearing the muggy, hot, horrible energy that we've been struggling to breathe in. When someone is shouting at you, take it as an opportunity to see it as the thunderstorm, to create some clarity, because that's where you have the power. It doesn't matter what anybody else does, that's where you hold your power.
I love that. Before we close, what's the best quote that you've ever heard on self-growth?
Oh my life.
Or what's your best lesson on self-growth? Or something like, what's the best thing you've learned that's helped you grow?
I think the most important thing for me is it's always around energy. Because going back to what I was saying before, if you are in a space where you are contained and you don't feel like you can grow, there is no space for you to go through those seasons, to have those experiences. Everything comes back down to energy. If you are unable to breathe, to speak, to express, and to look at yourself because everything around you is dark or heavy or scary, there is no way you're going to enjoy this experience of life. We only get one shot. So always pay attention to energy. I think you said on our last podcast together that energy never lies.
Never.
And always go back to that. And actually, a lot of my clients that saw that podcast quote that back to me. So if we're going to talk about favourite quotes, I think that has to be one of them.
I love that.
Because it did resonate. So it's very, very simple, very, very basic. But anyone that saw your clip and was like, yeah, energy never lies. So maybe that's the favourite quote.
I love that. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful
I'm
for
so
you coming
grateful.
all the way here, sprinting here, splitting your shorts, and still being the best energy ever. So thank you.
Oh, thank you, Shivani.
Thank you. Thank you
We
so
did
much.
it.